Running a law firm like a business is not a dirty word. Our number one value is serving our clients. We're representing our clients in the best possible manner. And you know what? These best business principles result in better service to our clients.
Michael McCready is the managing partner of McCready Law, a personal injury and workers' compensation firm with over 160 team members across 4 states. This is a conversation about the moment a trial lawyer stops being the smartest person in every room and starts building something bigger than any single verdict.
I had that aha moment. I was involved with everything. I realized that I was the pinch point in a lot of things, and I was holding things back. I went to my team and I said, am I the problem here with the law firm? And to a person, they all said, yeah.
In this episode, you'll learn how McCready scaled from solo practitioner to 160 people by identifying the 4 stages every law firm must pass through, and why most founders stall at stage 2. How his firm built a custom internal LLM with their own values baked in, and the change management process that made adoption stick, and why the firms that treat practice like a business, not just a calling, are the ones positioned to compete as private equity reshapes the legal landscape. I'm Jason Lazarus, and this is Trial Lawyer Review. Michael, welcome to Trial Lawyer Review, and thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. Looking forward to it.
So as a starting point, you founded McCready Law, or some iteration of it, I think in 1999 from doing my research, after making partner at another firm in just 4 years. When you look at the early years on your own, what were the operational problems you didn't see coming, even as someone who was experienced a bit as a trial lawyer?
Well, one thing that I always tell people when you're first starting out is you've got more time than money, right? So, I did a lot of grunt work and met a lot of people. What you have to understand is when you start your own firm, you need clients, right? You can be the best trial lawyer in the world. You can get great verdicts, but it's not necessarily going to make your phone ring. Back in the early days, when it was just myself, I did a lot of grassroots marketing and, meeting people in the community and meeting lawyers, but never underestimate the necessity of getting cases in the door.
So when you were starting out in terms of the logistics of that, how did you begin to build the foundation for what's turned into today a very busy multi-state practice?
Well, there's a real progression that you need for building a law firm. You have to start by being a good lawyer. I mean, there's no substitute for that. You need to know what you're doing. The second skill that you need to develop is how to be good with clients. And that's an entirely different skill. I mean, I've known great trial lawyers over the years that are terrible with clients. And then likewise, I've known people who, let's put it this way, they're not the best of lawyers, but the clients love them because they know how to handle and how to treat clients. It's like a bedside manner, right? Some doctors have it and some people don't. So lawyers are the same way. So, start out being a good lawyer, then learn, how to deal with clients. The next step in my law firm was learning how to run a business. You cannot underestimate how important it is to be able to run your firm like a business. And that means having the proper books for your finances, understanding about payroll and technology and licensing and business and corporations, all of that. In order to have a successful law firm, you need to learn how to do those kind of things. Next step in my progression was learning about marketing. Like I said earlier, is that you can be a great lawyer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be beating down your door to hire you. So no matter what type of law that you practice, you need to be constantly marketing and figuring out where the next client or the next case is going to come from. And then eventually, where I am now in my career is really building a law firm for culture and building a firm that people want to work at, that believe in what you're doing and why you're doing it. And and that's really the hardest part out of everything is building a firm that's got the culture that allows it to be successful.
That's a great point. And making sure people understand purpose behind their work. We do that in all of our all hands meetings. We talk about examples of in our business resolving liens, how we've helped someone that's been injured by getting an ERISA lien waived, or a compromise on a Medicare conditional payment or a Medicaid lien. Those things that actually make a difference in that person's life, and gives our team insight into what they do and how it matters in the end, because that purpose is, a big part of, at least the way I see it, culture, because I want our people to care as much as I care about how we show up and help the injured parties and the law firms that entrust us to work with their clients.
I think that a lot of people, bosses, whether they're lawyers or some other business, forget to explain the why. Hey, well, this is how we do it. This is how we reduce a lien, or this is how we send out discovery, but why? Right? And by teaching your team the why behind the different things that you do, you'd be surprised. It makes a big difference. Then you start having people think a little bit more creatively. And when they do come up with, an unusual situation, if they know the why, and then they also know the values that you and your firm hold, they can answer those questions without having to go to their supervisor all the time. And ultimately, that's what you want. Is you want independent thinking people that can help you and your clients and your business. But if you explain to your team what the why is, why do we do it? Okay, it makes a big difference, and I think it's a step that people overlook.
Since you were talking about culture, in doing the research for the podcast, I saw something along the way. You were talking about a commitment to developing leadership within your firm, and also the kind of operational underpinnings with, I think you've implemented EOS, which is something that I implemented at Synergy years ago and has really served us well. But I'm curious how you have connected all of those dots with those sorts of things to make your firm run operationally at an optimal level.
The law firm is a business, and I have read a lot of business books. And our business happens to be law, but those fundamental principles of business are important. And depending on the size of your firm, a firm with 5 employees is different than a firm with 20 employees, which is different than a firm with 50 employees. We're up to 160 now. So I've been through all of those stages. And each of those number of employees brings different challenges. You don't need supervisors if there's only 5 people in your office. You're it. Okay. When you get to a certain level, you need to have people who supervise other people. That's not me. Okay. I mean, I need to be doing the things that bring the most value to the firm, and I need to hire people to be supervisors. It's not the best use of my time. So the size of the firm that I have now, one of my main goals is training leaders and training department heads. And yes, boy, that sure sounds corporate, Michael. Well, you know what? That's what's required at a company or a firm my size. If you had 160 people with no supervisors, it would be chaos. Nothing would happen. So, a lot of what I do now, I mean, I can't train the receptionist. I can't train employee number 161. Can't do it. So, I need to make sure that I'm training the people that will be in the position to do that. So, I'm working with, our director of intake. I'm working with our HR department. I'm working with the case manager supervisors and teaching them how to lead their teams in the same way that I used to teach and train and mentor when it was much smaller. So just really depends on the size and the dynamics of your firm. But if you've got a good foundation, if you understand the growth trajectory of a business, by the time you get to where I am, a lot of the groundwork is already done and you can focus on this. We don't need to be focusing on process and procedure because we tackled that a long time ago. If we were at 160 people and had no processes, we were trying to handle that, to create those processes now, it just wouldn't be successful. So, that's something that should be handled, much earlier on as your business grows.
Well, it's a good segue into what I was going to ask you about, which is a lot of personal injury firms are great at securing justice for clients, but struggle behind the scenes with how the firm actually runs. And I know you do a bit of consulting with other firms. Where do you see the biggest gap between a success in the courtroom versus a healthy business? Because we were just talking about all those things about what actually is important for a business of your size and really along that continuum.
I mean, success in the courtroom, besides, a little bit of talent, really focuses on preparation. The lawyer who is more prepared is generally speaking going to have a better outcome than someone who's just winging it. And so, that's on a case by case basis by going to court, but look at it within your firm as a whole. Are you reinventing the wheel on every case? You shouldn't be doing that. There's certain things that happen in every single case, certain things that happened at the same time in every case. And the more that you can create a process around that, the better the outcome is going to be. First, it's going to be consistent. You don't have 10 people doing things 10 different ways. So, consistency matters, but it also matters, at least with personal injury. Listen, we're a contingency fee practice. We're not doing billable hours. And so if it takes us 10 hours to do something, and we can do it in 8 hours, that's saving 2 hours, and that's going to increase your profit or increase the amount of money that goes into the firm. So we're always looking for efficiencies and how to do things in a better manner. And you know what? These efficiencies and these processes, at the end of the day, result in better results for our clients. Okay, because it's consistent. We're delivering a consistent legal representation to a wide variety of clients by the processes that we have developed. And listen, your employees, they want process. They want feedback. They want to know that they're doing things the proper way. And then it does allow those high performing team members, the nuance, the things that they can add to a case if they know the foundation of what they do every day is there for them.
You run a multi-state law firm from Puerto Rico, and a lot of founders of law firms, I think, struggle to let go of being the person who touches every single thing in the firm. And I'm curious what had to change in how you lead the firm when the volume and geography outgrew what one person could manage.
I had that aha moment is that when I was still actively handling cases, and, as you said, I was involved with everything. I realized that I was the pinch point in a lot of things and I was holding things back. And I went to my office was much smaller back then, but I went to my team and they said, am I the problem here with the law firm? And to a person, they all said, yeah, they all knew it, but I didn't. So it was that epiphany that I had that I was holding back the progress of the firm. I was holding back the progress of the cases, and I was holding back the resolution for our clients. And so, once I came to that realization, then I was having a look and see, do I really need to be involved with this? Because I've always had great people working with me and people that I do trust. So it's not a matter. Some people can't trust the people they're working with. That's a problem. Okay, if you can't trust the people that are working for you, you may need new people because they're out there. But when you have that trust that your team can deliver what you need them to deliver, it does make it a little bit easier. And so, more and more, I was able to let go of things that I really shouldn't be handling. And then that allows me to focus on what I do, what my strengths are. So I was a really good trial lawyer, but I am a better managing partner. And I've got great lawyers that work for me. It doesn't need to be me. Every lawyer has got that ego to them that says, oh, no one can do it as good as me. And I'm no different. I still think that I'm probably the best one at my firm. But you know what? It doesn't mean that I have to do everything. It doesn't mean that I should do everything. And I need to focus on the things that move the needle the most for the firm because at the end of the day, I've got a lot of mouths to feed. I've got a lot of families that we support. So, what is the best use of my time?
Yeah, it's great advice, especially as you're scaling and growing, is to figure out where the bottleneck is. And if it's you, then you got to make sure you solve for that. And it's tough to check your ego at the door. And I think most businesses go through that at some point if you're scaling and growing. I know we did. And, I've realized I needed to surround myself with certain people as the company grew to make sure that we continue to evolve. So it is a challenge that everybody faces.
The best use of your time may be the lead trial attorney. Okay. I'm not saying that, to give it all up and go the route that I've gone, the best use of your time may be trying cases. And if that's the case, you need to make sure that there are other people doing things in the office. Okay. You cannot do everything. So focus on what you're best at. And you know what? It's probably what you enjoy the most. We tend to be good at what we enjoy doing. But you do need to make sure that you're hiring to compensate for those things that will not be addressed. So if you don't have a business sense, if you don't, you can't balance a checkbook, so to speak, you need to hire somebody that's going to do that. You need to have a bookkeeper or accountant or something to make sure that the money that you're making trying cases is being managed properly and not being wasted and God forbid not being embezzled. PI attorneys are infamous for being ripped off by their employees because they just don't have a handle on where all the money is and where it's going.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but let me ask you this. What if your firm could scale without adding operational drag? As case volume grows, lean resolution and compliance can quietly slow everything down. Synergy works alongside personal injury firms as an operations partner, managing these processes so teams stay focused on clients, strategy, and outcomes, not administrative details. If you want to understand how firms are handling this at scale, click the link in the show notes or scan the QR code on the screen to learn more. Now, let's get back to the episode.
What is one operational decision that you've made in the last 5 years that has had the biggest impact on the way the firm operates and runs on a day-to-day basis?
I would say We split a position. I had a firm administrator who basically ran everything, and we split that position into operations and human resources. Completely different skills. So that's been a really big point. Now, listen, most firms probably aren't big enough to have those two roles, and so it's probably one person. Maybe it's just an office manager, but you have to understand that people wear a lot of hats. And at some point, the firm grows, and you need to make sure there's a book, good to great, where it's you have to have the right people in the right seats. And that's critical. Maybe you have the right people, the right person, but they're not doing the thing that's best for them, or maybe you don't have the right person. So from my perspective, that was a really big change. We recently brought on a COO from outside of legal. I wanted somebody coming in with a fresh perspective on how to run a large multi state firm that had no background in law. So that was a big change. Once again, hiring department heads or promoting department heads has been a real big change. But I would say for firms that are smaller than mine, the very first thing that makes the biggest difference is focus on intake. And even if intake is just your receptionist answering the phone, any new case, you need to make sure you're paying attention to, and not enough people do. When you have got an intake, I mean, we've got a department, but if you've got even one person, a paralegal that's in charge of intake, and that is their main responsibility, that will do more for your firm than than working 80 hours preparing for a case. So that would be my recommendation is work on intake.
If a firm leader is listening right now and knows that their operations are holding them back, but haven't started fixing it yet, what would you tell them to do in the next 90 days? Something that can really start to change the momentum of the way the firm runs.
Lawyers don't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are best practices out there to run a law firm. And if you don't know them, you need to start working with someone that does. So whether it's bringing in a consultant, or attending a mastermind, we hire a lot of people, independent contractors off of a website called Upwork. And you can put a job posting up there and say, I am a 10-person personal injury law firm. We need to work on our operations. We would like to get SOPs, standard operating procedures, in place. We would like, to start tracking metrics and KPIs, key performance indicators. So even if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can bring someone in that's going to hold your hand and start. What the expression is, the best time to have planted a tree was yesterday. The next best time is today. So you do have to start. And if you have started, pay attention to running your business, or bring people in that are going to pay attention to running your business. And it will pay unbelievable dividends.
I've had so many guests talk about this, and it seems like there is certainly a shift towards viewing a law practice and running it more like a business, because at the end of the day, you still have to pay salaries, still want to have money to take home for yourself, and looking at how the firm operates from an efficiency and profitability standpoint is critical to being able to make the right decisions. Without those metrics and KPIs and SOPs, and I mean, all of it's going to be nearly impossible to get to the end result that you want unless you just happen to get lucky. Meaning, if you don't chart it out and point in the right direction, you're probably never going to reach where you want to go, because you're not inspecting it, you're not measuring it, and you're not seeing how close you are to achieving your goal.
100%. And listen, running a law firm like a business is not a dirty word. Our number one value is serving our clients. And we're doing, we're representing our clients in the best possible manner. And you know what? These best business principles result in, better service to our clients. If you're completely disorganized and, you know, when I started, you could picture a lawyer's desk that was, this high, full of papers and folders everywhere, and it was a disaster. And maybe that lawyer claimed to know where everything was, but you know what? That is not the best way to represent a client. When you have things and your office has got the basic business principles set up, it gives you the freedom to be able to give the best service to your clients. You cannot be a good lawyer without having a good business behind you. Now, that doesn't mean that the good lawyer has to do the business. Maybe you're a fantastic trial attorney. Well, go to a law firm where you can have somebody like myself that manages the back. Those are the best partnerships, are the lawyer that handles all the business side of it and the lawyer that handles all the legal side of it. That's a match made in heaven. So, find out where you fit on the continuum and work your life and your career around that. And make sure that you surround yourself to compensate for those things that absolutely are essential and need to be done. I think enough people understand the business side of law now. Business side of law does not mean that it's neglecting the clients. We still have that fundamental tenet, is that we're representing the client's interests, which the big news these days is private equity coming in to the market, and alternative business structures and so forth and so on, and lots of people are up in arms and against this. But what it's really doing is it's bringing business principles to law firms, which is a good thing, which in the long run is going to be good for the client experience. And as long as the attorneys, hold their ethical duty to the client, I think that it's a net positive. Of course, the alternative argument is that when you have non-lawyer owners or non-lawyer investors, their goal is to maximize profits. There's where the conflict can arise. But we're lawyers, and I don't care who owns it. We have a duty to the client. We have an ethical duty. So. But that's also another important thing about running a business, running a law firm like a business.
Hey, you brought up something that I wanted to ask you about, which is the private equity entering into the personal injury law firm space via ABS, and now the more MSOs we're starting to see, which in turn changes the landscape for law firm operations. And I wanted to get your take on where it's all headed and the impact. I mean, I understand some of the things you've outlined are important considerations. I'm just curious what you see, because from my perspective, I see that shift as an important one to ultimately drive the efficiency and market, so to speak, because without firms being pushed to really look at that, because with this happening, I think in order to compete, you're going to have some minimum business sense and organization, because if this becomes more common and proliferates, it's going to mean something in the way I view it, in terms of how firms that are not thinking in those terms are able to compete, particularly with technology, and we'll touch on that in a second. But what are your thoughts in terms of how that's going to change the landscape?
Private equity or investment, yes, profit is important. But you know what? You know, lawyers try to make a profit. If lawyers own a law firm, it's 100% owned by lawyers. Their goal is to make a profit. It's no different. So as long as lawyers maintain their independence from the equity, profit is not a dirty word. And whether it's an MSO or whether it's an ABS in Arizona or some other hybrid, or the lawyer, once they take that oath of office, has that duty to a client. And profit and the duty to the client do not necessarily need to be in conflict. Is there a possibility that it can conflict? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the client's interest is paramount over any profit. And I believe that that it can operate. It is proven to be able to operate, and still keep the client's best interest at the forefront.
Definitely going to be an interesting shift. I do think, though, from a competitive standpoint, because if you see consolidation happening and you've got private equity money behind those firms, it's sort of what I've seen happen in our local marketplace. We're based in Orlando, which is where John Morgan started Morgan, Colling and Gilbert, now Morgan and Morgan. And seeing what's happened with a firm that has that kind of capital, that kind of size, what it does to the ability of other firms to compete, it changes the landscape.
Well, I mean, we live in a capitalist society. I mean, I'm sorry. The best businesses, are probably going to come out on top. I mean, no one will disagree that John Morgan is an amazing businessman. Okay, I mean, he has built an amazing law firm. You might not like it, but you have to respect it. And it's not just him. There's lots of law firms. I mean, I'm not comparing myself to Morgan and Morgan, but I'm very proud of what I've built. There are options out there, but for law firms, it's extremely expensive to be able to build something like John Morgan or myself or for other law, to get to a certain point. It takes a tremendous amount of money. And if you can consolidate those resources, in other words, I mean, we've built out an unbelievable IT stack, right? I mean, we're very, very tech forward. It's cost me a lot of money. And it's not something that most law firms are in the financial position to do. But guess what? If you're involved with an MSO and all of the information technology, all the IT is handled outside of your law firm, and it can be scaled not just for your law firm, but 10 other law firms which are using the same base technology, well, now you can compete on a technological basis. I explained how we divided operations from human resources. Not everybody can do that. But if you have a dedicated human resources department, which is outside of the law firm, which now can handle 10 different law firms, you've got HR resources that were never possible for you. And so all of these things, if they are handled outside of the law firm, or the investment is brought into the law firm to allow the law firm to do these, the law firm is going to do better. And by doing better, you're helping the clients. Hey, you are giving clients better representation if you've got the top technology. You're giving clients better representation if you've got your human resources department with onboarding and benefits, and you hire the best people because you've got a great HR department. So, all of these things all contribute to the success of the law firm. And instead of having all these law firms be little islands and having to do it all themselves, where the changes are coming from in the legal landscape, I think is going to be a net positive for the clients. I really do.
And right now, everyone is focused on AI and deployment of it. I know from doing some background research that you guys are actually using it. And I'm curious for you guys, where is AI creating operational value inside of your law firm, and where have you found that it falls short?
Yeah, so I mean, one of our firm values is technology. Okay, and it always has been. AI is just the newest technology. I mean, so going back 25 years, we were one of the first people on the internet. So when I was a young attorney, lawyers would say, "Oh, I don't need a website. I've got a brochure. This is how I get my clients." And those people that adopted websites were ahead of the game. And oh, I don't need SEO because I've got a website. Everybody's going to no, you need SEO. Well, AI is the same way. Okay. Is you absolutely have to have this. You have to be involved. And the early adopters like myself are already so far ahead, and the pace that AI has, it's going to be very hard for most law firms to catch a firm like mine. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. I mean, you have to be so heavily invested, and what I don't necessarily mean just money. You need to be invested in incorporating AI in every possible manner that you can in your law firm. But now this is where most law firms come up short. They think, oh yeah, let's just you know get the next best vendor and put it in, and oh, we're going to be AI. No, that's not. First off, you need to make sure that whoever you're going to work with is going to provide what you actually need. Then you need to learn about change management. You cannot, even with lawyers, you can't just say, hey, here's a new AI tool, get to work. You need to roll it out. You need to explain what it is. You need to do it gradually. I mean, there's a whole process for implementing technology in a new manner. And if you want your team to succeed with technology, you have to give them what they need in order to use it. You have to explain to them the why. Not that AI is going to replace your job. No, not at all. AI is going to help you do your job better. And then you have to monitor AI adoption. Every AI platform has got user statistics. And we look at that each week and we see who's using it and who's not. And those people that aren't using it, we need to go to them and say, hey, I see that you're not using your new tools. What is it that's keeping you from that? And find out what it is. And is it more training, or are they afraid, or maybe they just didn't have time? And get everybody up to speed. And then eventually, if there are people that, even though we've taken all these steps to get them to utilize AI, still aren't, we have to have that discussion with them, is that we are an AI first law firm. And every position in this law firm is going to be using AI. And if you're not comfortable with that, then we probably need to think about moving you on to a different law firm where you would be comfortable. I'm reluctant because what we're doing right now today, it's hard to comprehend. The stuff that most law firms need to be doing, we were doing 18, 24 months ago. So I tried to talk about what law firms should be doing now. Now, of course, there are definitely law firms that are at the cutting edge, but most law firms aren't there. So they need to, they need to start investigating, and figuring out what AI tools are going to work best for them. Find the low hanging fruit. It does not mean you need to bring in all this AI from top to bottom. Find something in intake. Find some kind of AI automation. There's so many cool platforms out there, and start investigating and start rolling it out bit by bit. You have to encourage your team to use the LLMs, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, or there's a whole bunch of. You have to start encouraging your team to using these. You have to make sure that you have the guardrails in place to use AI. You have to have an AI policy. You have to understand about client confidentiality. You have to understand about data security and privacy. These are all the things that you need to be doing now before you start getting into agentic AI and AI basically running your law firm.
In doing a bit of research, my understanding is that you guys have done a lot of automation in addition to deployment of AI, which obviously is part of the whole technology stack solution for a law firm. And I'm curious, what was the first workflow you guys ultimately automated, and what did it teach you about where perhaps your firm was losing time and money?
Going back to understanding what your processes are. If something is done the same way every single time, look for a way to automate it. If it's A, B, C, and D, find a way to skip B and C. Just go from A to D. We've been very active for years about communicating with clients, because one of the biggest criticisms of lawyers is, I don't know what's going on with my case. So one of the first automations that we started years ago, you settle a case and you tell the client, all right, it'll be 30 days for your check. So what happens? 1 week later, is my check there? Is my check there? Is my check? And you can't blame the client, but that is a huge time suck. Where we're settling, somewhere between 100 and 120 cases a month. If even one phone call, that's 100 inbound calls, and it's not just one phone call. So that's the problem. What did we do to solve it? What we did was create an automated sequence of texts. So there's a trigger. As soon as we mail the release to the insurance company, it starts a series of texts. The first text says, we mailed it to the insurance company. It can take up to 30 days. And the next one is maybe a week. And at a week, it'll say, hey, it's been a week. Just letting you know. And then 10 days. So we're texting them every 2 to 3 days over that 30-day period. And it's, hey, the mail came in today, your check wasn't there. Hey, we called the insurance company and we're checking on the status of your check and left a voicemail. And we're giving them proactively all of this update for those 30 days. And not surprisingly, our inbound calls for my check went down dramatically. So with that model, we built it out through the entire life cycle of the case. So we're constantly keeping the clients up to date with what's going on with their case solely through automations, right? So, the plaintiff's deposition, it's going to be at every single case. And so we have a whole series of texts. The defendant wants to take your deposition. We'll let you know when the date is set. Here's what a deposition is. Your deposition is set 30 days out. Hey, just a reminder, your deposition's in 14 days. Another reminder, your deposition is in 3 days. Please call us to prepare. Deposition is tomorrow. Deposition is today in 2 hours. If all of these things go out to a client. And it's all automatic. So that's not AI. That's just programming automations. But if you start thinking like that, then AI will make a lot more sense to you, because AI, especially agentic AI, is a computer. It's not a program, but it's it's a computer that is executing operations. Okay, it's given parameters, and this is what we want you to do, and this is how we want you to do it. And if this happens, then this is what's going to happen. So it is similar to the idea of an automation, but it's an automation on steroids. And so much of what we do and what our team does every day is relatively routine and can be done. So something as simple as you have discovery from the defendant, And in the old days, you're going through the whole file and you're answering it. Well, now AI can do that. You put the interrogatories into AI, and it has access to your system, and it gives you a pretty good first draft. Is that what we send out to the defense attorney? Absolutely not. The guardrails that we have in place absolutely require human intervention and human approval. We have an audit trail for all the AI that we do to verify that what is being done is accurate. And everything that AI touches before it goes out the door, someone is taking ownership of that. It's essential. You read about these hallucinated cases, and this is not a surprise, folks. Right? This happens. So the fact that it's still happening just absolutely blows my mind. I would like to say that it will never happen in my firm. I never say never, but the processes that we have in place to verify and to audit what we're doing, it would be highly unlikely that that would happen to our firm. And I've made it abundantly clear to everyone in the firm that if that were to ever happen, that is instant termination. Okay, you will lose your job with one mistake.
I'm curious about where in your process automation does touch and where deliberately you've chosen it not touch. So where in your process is it and where is it not?
We already have it built out where AI will hold whole conversations with clients. We have AI that can do intake. We've got AI that can act as a case manager. Okay. Understand that this is something that we have built out that will communicate and have a conversation with someone in the parameters that we have developed. We have not, generally speaking, rolled that out, even though we have it's good. It's really good. The problem is right now, as you and I talk, is that the general public has not embraced this. They have not. They're just not used to it. Now, once Target and American Express and all these other companies start rolling out voice agentic AI, and people are used to and accustomed to speaking to a computer, that's when we'll feel much more comfortable. The analogy that I like to use, we were using e-signatures before COVID, and we would only get 50% of the people that felt comfortable enough doing that. Then COVID came, and everybody adopts electronic signature, and now you just take it for granted. Everything we do is with electronic signature. So agentic AI and client interactions, it will become acceptable enough that we'll be able to roll that out. We're already experimenting with after hours intake with voice chatbots, and so far we've gotten a pretty good reception.
I think that there's some lawyers and commentators that worry that automation and AI and technology can strip away the judgment and instinct that makes for a great advocate as a lawyer. How do you think about protecting the human side of advocacy while trying to systematize everything around it?
AI is just a tool. Okay, AI should be used to augment or to supplement a lawyer's judgment or a lawyer's skill. It is not meant to completely replace it. So, AI will not replace lawyers. Lawyers that use AI will replace lawyers that don't use AI. No doubt about it. So there's certainly plenty of room for very good lawyers. However, AI is going to replace a lot of lawyers that are replaceable. You look at the things that AI can do right now are what entry level associates have always done. And especially in the billable hour firms, why would any consumer of legal services pay for an associate to do something when it can be done by AI? Now, yes, you do want to make sure that the senior legal talent, you're going to pay them handsomely for their judgment on those things that do require judgment and advice. But for, routine matters, no, AI is going to replace a lot of that.
I'm curious if you'd be willing to share with listeners about the tech stack that you currently deploy in your firm.
Well, it's all custom, right? We've built it all out, but it's a lot of stuff that's layered on top of each other. We have our own internal LLM. So imagine, Chat GPT that's based solely on, our law firm, and we have that segregated into silos. In fact, one of the cool things that we've developed is with all my speaking and all my transcripts and all my writing. I finished a book which is going to be released in November. We have put all of that into an LLM, and now people can ask, just like Chat GPT, and it will give them how I would have approached that response. Why is that important? Because all LLMs have a certain bias in them. And we were able to build out this particular LLM with my biases. We have firm values that are absolutely critical to our law firm. We have those baked in. And when you have, values, that's going to give you a different response. So, for example, one of our firm values is diversity. Now, I know in the political climate right now that, there's a lot of pushback against diversity. Well, that is absolutely critical to who we are. It is what my law firm is about. And by having that in, our LLMs, and then our other firm values, approachability, accessibility, creativity, things like that, those are all the parameters by which my team can ask questions, and then the answer is going to come out. And that answer is going to be different than if you programmed your own LLM or if you asked ChatGPT. So I think that's where I think that technology is going, is that every business is going to be able to build out their own custom LLM and use it for those purposes. We've got one for our HR department. So, yes, we've got a handbook, but you know what? Our handbook is now in an LLM. And so instead of looking at the index or whatever, now we just, you type in a question. Does the firm close on Juneteenth? You just ask a question and boom, there's the answer, as opposed to going through the index and finding where are the firm holidays. So that's where I think most businesses are going to go. Then, of course, programming agentic AI, but that's down the road for most firms.
Michael, you've been very generous with your time. One last question, and I always ask it, it's very open-ended, so you can answer it however you want. As an experienced trial lawyer, as a leader of a firm that's grown and scaled, as someone who consults and speaks on these issues, what's your view as a trial lawyer?
Well, the most successful trial lawyers are lifelong learners. Okay. I feel like trial lawyers need to apply that same instinct that they bring to trying a case to understanding their business and understanding how technology is going to impact it. Most trial lawyers I know, they read the treatises, right? They know the reptile theory. They know the rules of the road, running with the bulls, you name it. They've read those books. They have invested in their development as a trial lawyer. I think that they need to apply that same zeal to learning about technology and how technology can be used. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to become a computer programmer, but they have to become tech conversant. And so when they are talking to people, and you'd be surprised. One of the other presentations I do is how we use ChatGPT for trial, from voir dire all the way to closing, and you know, it gets a pretty good reception from trial lawyers. Let's put it that way.
So if anyone listening today has questions for you, wants to get in touch with you, wants to refer a case to your firm, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. Hopefully, if my SEO company is doing their job, if you search McCready Law, I'm going to come up. If it doesn't, then I got to get a new SEO company. But I'm also very active on LinkedIn. I post a lot about what we're doing, what my thoughts are on the industry. And then I've got one of those really, really sneaky emails. It's michael@McCreadyLaw.com. So, I always encourage people to reach out. And then, shameless plug, we're a single event personal injury practice. We've got offices throughout the Midwest, and most of our cases come from referring attorneys from around the country. So those are the relationships that we really try to foster to become the go-to referral partner in the Midwest.
Michael, thank you for taking the time to join me today on Trial Law Review, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. It's always a pleasure.
If today's episode gave you a new perspective on how your firm operates or sparked a useful idea, consider sharing it with a colleague and be sure to follow the show so you don't miss future conversations with leaders across the personal injury space. Trial Law Review is brought to you by Synergy, a strategic operations partner helping personal injury law firms resolve healthcare liens more efficiently. If you're looking to accelerate case flow and allow your team to focus on high-level legal work that moves cases faster, consider partnering with Synergy. I'm Jason Lazarus, and I'll see you in the next episode.